Um, well, yes, I could do that. Okay. All right. Good evening, everyone. Welcome to this town hall on money and technology and elections. This event is being sponsored by the Digital Citizenry Project, which is being funded by a grant from the New Jersey Council for the Humanities. I'm Mary Balkin, professor of English at Seton Hall University. My co-sponsor, worker, partner in crime in this event is Dr. Moderator from the university's libraries. So we have three fabulous people who are going to be speaking this evening with Stephen Schnall, who is a trustee for the Village of South Orange. He is going to serve as our moderator. He will also introduce everyone. So I'm just going to hand it over now to Stephen.
Thank you, Mary. Thanks very much. And thank you for our sponsors. Yes, we have an incredible panel. So I'm going to just introduce them and then we'll get right to the questions. I'm sure you're eager to hear all about what they have to say. So starting with Saily Avelenda, she's the executive director of the New Jersey Democratic State Committee. Prior to this, Ms. Avelenda was the executive director of the New Jersey 11th for Change and a founding steering committee member of the group. Until May of 2017, Ms. Avelenda was employed as the Senior Vice President and Assistant General Counsel at a community bank in Northern New Jersey. I'm just going to ask those folks, Mary, maybe you can mute them.
Got it.
Ms. Avelenda left her position shortly after her then Congressman, Rodney Frelinghuysen, alerted a member of her employee's board of directors about her activities with the NJ 11th for Change. Ms. Avelenda, in turn, alerted the media about Congressman Frelinghuysen's actions, and he announced his retirement in January of 2018. In November of that same year, New Jersey's 11th Congressional District overwhelmingly elected Mikey Sherrill to take his seat. New Jersey 11th for Change is widely credited with having paved the way for the Congresswoman's victory. Ms. Avelenda received her JD from the University of Pennsylvania Law School and her BA from New York University. Moving on, we have Brandon McKoy, President and Chief Executive of the New Jersey Policy Perspective, a nonpartisan public policy think tank, and leads that organization's efforts in shaping policy debates to advance economic justice for the many, not a chosen few. Prior to being named president of the NJPP in February of 2019, Brandon served as its Director of Government and Public Affairs, where he designed and implemented the organization's outreach, advocacy, and government relations activities. He received a master's in city and regional planning and policy development from Rutgers University Edward Bloustein School of Planning and Public Policy, and holds a bachelor's degree in social psychology from the College of New Jersey. Most importantly, Brandon is a native son of South Orange and graduated of Columbia High School in the class of 2005. I very much appreciate that, Brandon. Dr. Hale, Dr. Matthew Hale, is currently an associate professor and the MPA program chair for the Department of Political Science and Public Affairs at Seton Hall University. His research focuses on the intersection of media and technology in the public and nonprofit sectors. Dr. Hale is a frequent media commentator and pundit on New Jersey and national politics. He's a regular guest on a number of New Jersey's television shows, including NJTV's For the Record and News 12 New Jersey's Power and Politics. He has also appeared on CNN, Fox News, CNBC, and a number of local broadcast television stations in the New York and New Jersey area. At Seton Hall, Dr. Hale has taught many courses in the MPA program, including the ethics of big data, public sector leadership, public sector ethics, financial management, and budget and strategic management and governance. His interest in politics precedes his academic life. Dr. Hale worked as an aide to California Senator Barbara Boxer and in the press and candidate advance operations for several local, state, and national political campaigns. Dr. Hale is the current vice president of the New Jersey Big Data Alliance. This coalition of over 15 colleges and universities in New Jersey works to develop New Jersey's cyber infrastructure and make sure that the state can be competitive in the new big data economy. So you can hear what incredible backgrounds and experience our panelists have. So we're going to get at it with our first question. So given that technology has really greatly evolved with regard to the broad media coverage versus the old way of knocking on doors and shaking hands and kissing babies, But given the limited financial resources that many campaigns have, they have made significant advances in using superior targeting technologies for efficiency as gaining granular data collection. So Saily, talk to us a little bit what you think the impact digital technology and micro-targeting on voters and identifying their particular pet issues. What has that had on campaigns?
So if you think about, if you take canvassing aside and you think about what media technology was like for campaigns before, right? 10 days before an election, you're watching your major news network, and there's, boom, 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 30-second ads, right? Millions of dollars are paid over, that 7 to 9 p.m. time frame, right? Captive audience, everyone's sitting on the couch. Let's throw out as much media as possible. That's the old way. Now imagine that if you knew that your viewers read the New York Times or didn't read the New York Times, were ex-watchers of this, supported these types of causes and bought these types of magazine subscriptions, and then these other people bought this subscription and then watched this television and were members of these groups, how you could use that 30 seconds to target those two different demographics, right? You're not spending millions of dollars on a blanket message that just says, vote for my person because my person is better than your person. You're literally saying, vote for my person because you know what my person does? My person does what you do. They subscribe to the Times, they donate to these causes. They also bought a, whatever thing that popped up in your Facebook feed that you can literally target to that specific person. And I was shocked to learn when we were dealing with NJ11 specifically that you could, all of these programs allow you to do that. So think about right now from your experiences, when you, for example, you go online and you search for, I had to search for kids mattresses the other day. We bought kid mattresses and then I got kid mattresses ads for like 3 weeks, things I had just bought, but only because I did that search. So that targeting, that's exactly what political organizations and issue-based groups are doing. They're looking to see what your activity looks like, what your interests look like, and they are targeting directly to you. Good or bad, that is, because maybe you don't want 30 mattress ads in your feed after you bought the mattress, but that's how hyper local and hyper technical they can get to marketing specifically to you.
All right, thank you. Dr. Hale, do you want to add something from your perspective there?
Sure. As you said, I remember working in campaigns, and my first job in campaigns was to get college students from Boston to come to the New Hampshire primaries. And they'd show up thinking they were going to talk policy, and I handed them a clipboard and said, go out and knock on as many doors as you possibly can. And the information that they had at that particular time was the name of the person who was supposed to be at the door and whether that person voted in the last election. And that was it. There was nothing else. You could guess their gender, but that was about it. And today, a typical, this is obviously before COVID, but a typical canvassing operation, they can have 250 to 400 variables plugged in to a tablet that the canvassers go and go out with. And not only do they tell you all this information, they tell you which of the scripts, which of the door knocking scripts are most likely to be effective. That if it looks like this person that being pro-choice is a fundamental thing to who they are, start with a pro-choice script. If they think strong military is fundamental to who they are, start with that script. And so what it does is allows people to go in and make the best case that they can and not have to sort of fumble and try and find what the issue is. So from an efficiency perspective, campaigns are incredibly more efficient, not just in canvassing, but that's in fundraising and targeting, all of those types of issues. But one of the things that it does, and I think that this is important, is I think one of the things that it can do is you end up only hearing voices you agree with. You're targeted so much, whether it's a social media ad or whether it's canvassing or whether it's phone calls, all of the messages that you get can be exactly ones that they think that you want to hear, and they're probably right. So you don't get messages most of the time that might give you pause, or might give you a reason to go someplace else, a reason to think about something else. Because most people want to make a decision and then not talk about politics. It's not like most people want to find their candidate and call it a day. And one of the ways that's playing out in this particular election is how incredibly stable the polls have been. There has been there's very, very little movement at the top of the ticket right now. That both Joe Biden and Donald Trump have got their voters nailed. And there's this swing voter myth that might be out there, and there might be people who still haven't made up their mind, but the vast majority of people have been targeted in such a way and gotten the same information again and again, that the number of people who are persuadable, the number of people who are swing voters, is significantly less than it was before. We'll see how that plays out on election day, but I think a lot of that, most of that, comes from the targeting ability that we have across all levels of campaigns.
Can I just add something to that? I had taken a course, I don't know if it was a course, it was like a session with Seth Godin, who's a marketer. And one of the things he started out saying to us, and it was a specific course for nonprofit or civic-minded organizations, is we're really great on the issues, but we really are terrible at marketing. And honestly, politics is just marketing. And one of the things he tried to explain to us was, we approach politics as a marketing endeavor. We are trying to sell a behavior pattern, right? We are trying to show people, his tagline was, people like us do things like this. So by having the tools of micro-targeting and saying people like us, whatever that us is, whatever universe you have targeted, then you're trying to get them to do a specific behavior, which in this case would be vote for the specific, a targeted candidate. So his whole idea was, the more you know about the individual people making up your universe, the more you can, even if they're in an echo chamber, you can still try to make them follow a pattern of behavior that would be beneficial for your client. So ultimately, and I'll leave this before I finish, I'll leave this with your example, the difference between Harley Davidson and Suzuki, they both make the same product, but only one of those two brands do you want to tattoo on your body, right? Like one is a whole lifestyle, and the other one is a brand. And what you want to do is create essentially the sense of, I want that lifestyle, that brand, that big community sense, and I want to feel like I'm doing the things they're doing. So that's what the micro targeting could really help you with, is identifying that universe and then trying to create the circumstances to make them do the behavior, follow the behavioral pattern that you want.
Great, thank you. We're going to stay with technology for a while, but I want to shift ever so slightly, because we are also covering technology as well as money, and the two are in many ways interconnected. We're going to be exploring that. So Brandon, when we think about, again, all this campaign management, there's a couple different ways to go at it, top down or bottoms up, in terms of whether we're looking at very large corporate, very high wealthy donors versus the more grassroots way. If you could compare and contrast them, is one better than the other at this point?
Well, it's very interesting when you look at sort of the ease of acquiring data these days, and sort of to go off of what Professor Hale and Saily were talking about. When you think about campaigns using this data, it's not just campaigns, it's everyone. You can go on your Twitter profile right now and go into Twitter analytics and see your follower count and what your followers are like, what their profile is like, how many of them like dogs, how many, what age they are, all that type of stuff. And so when we sort of think about using data and how we target folks in general, that gets into the money side of things, because then you already have an understanding of who follows you, right? You can do sort of what they call, a wealth scan to understand exactly what is the giving capability and capacity of the folks who are already following you. And then you can do a wealth scan of the folks that you want to target to grow to, and to say, hey, we need to, we're not really getting engagement from these folks over here. we really want that because we want to hit, certain goals that we have from a fundraising standpoint. So, I think there's balance in everything, but this is one of the problems with sort of a post Citizens United world. You may have it because money is speech, and when money is treated as speech, it is very, very easy, or much, much easier for the very, very wealthy to have their speech heard. And so you end up actually having campaigns and, nonprofits and organizations and grassroots organizations and advocates, all that, having to have a really robust individual giving development campaign in order to stay afloat for a long time, to be successful to the degree that they want to. You can have great grassroots support, right? We've seen how Bernie Sanders has grown and shown that significant grassroots support can really change the landscape and lead to things happening that we didn't think of ever before. But as the landscape is currently constituted, having major, large, deep-pocketed donors is always going to be a game changer. And I think you see that in New Jersey, especially because we have so many wealthy residents here, that you end up having a lot of folks who get engaged early on and get engaged often and are consistently targeted by both candidates and organizations.
Thank you, Brandon. Saily, anything else you'd like to add to that?
I agree wholeheartedly with everything Brandon said, but I also think that, as somebody who was part of a grassroots organization that was told from day one that we couldn't do the thing we wanted to do, right? We had just started this organization after our then congressperson won by over 19 points. And then we were laughed at, right? We were told, it's great that you want to do this. It's great that you want to put all this together, but you don't have $250,000 to start with as a baseline. So I do, the reality that Brendan talks about is that we definitely, there is never going to be a situation where big donors are not part of our system, right? Even if, I believe firmly, like even if Citizens United is changed or returned, whatever we want to do with it, it's a terrible law to start with. But no matter what happens there, they will find a way. The system will find a way to put the big money into the political. I just think it's in the interest of the people making these decisions to continue that. So I think that will always be something to contend with, right? But I don't want to discount the power of a grassroots momentum, because I saw it happen firsthand. I actually went back when, you invited me, thank you for, on this panel, and tried to look at what Act Blue had done or what the grassroots had done. And in all of 2018, the election cycle, they processed $1.6 billion in grassroots or donations through their entire, cycle. I think that's the number for the whole cycle. And if you look at that number, in just the last quarter, that is what was processed through Act Blue, 1.5 billion in 3 months versus 2 years. I think there is power in individuals being able to participate in that piece of the democratic process in a small way, because obviously they're not giving 10,000 at a time. They're giving 25, maybe they're giving on recurring donations, but there is power to that. And there is, to me, power in a number that says that in that 3 month span, they took in 31.4 million individual donations with the average of $47 a piece. I think that there is still power there, and I will always believe in the power of the people over the power of the dollar, especially in politics. As much as I know that that's quite a haul, and I'm going to end up in the news on that comment, but I do believe in that 100%.
You heard it here first. There you go. All right, I want to shift ever so slightly. We've talked about the power of the technology, especially as it has around targeting and Saily around retargeting. If you do a search for something, you're going to see it over and over. Let's look at the darker side a little bit. Matt, the fact is there's been an accumulation of private information from direct response advertising. Let's talk about who gets to use this information and for what purposes. I mean, these data exchanges, not only is that data being brought in for one use, but it's actually being shared across other platforms. So talk to us a little bit about your thoughts there.
Sure. So both the Republicans and the Democrats nationally have set up these data consortiums. I think it's interesting that the Democrats originally, the Republicans did it first, and the Democrats sued saying it was illegal, unconstitutional. They lost, so they set up their own. So, you know, I think it's you know, that's the hand you're dealt. So you gotta play the hand you're dealt. So these data exchanges really are a way for like-minded or like-ish minded sides of the aisle to share massive amounts of data. So it used to be that it was a bargaining chip of whether or not a Senate candidate could have some access to a presidential list, or which Senate candidate would have a presidential access to that. And it really came down to how badly did they need the support of that senator in that particular state. And so they didn't share as much as they do. Now everyone shares. If you are a donor to the Joe Biden campaign, you can pretty much guess that you're going to get lots of emails and lots of solicitations from, you know, Colorado and Kentucky and South Carolina and Maine and Iowa and all of the places where there's contentious Senate races. You'll get asked, and it's because of these sort of data exchanges. And you can, the data sets are growing to such a huge extent that improves the ability of targeting, right? That improves the ability of narrowing down the people that you're going to target. You know, the story that sort of rings true to me, and maybe it does just because I'm an old academic, is my dissertation. I was in the library and I was looking around for an article that I needed, and I was actually in the library stacks, believe it or not. And I got sidetracked, and I went down to another set of articles and I started reading them, and I didn't leave for like a day and a half. And that's what my dissertation is on. Not the original article that I was looking at, but the article that I found by happenstance. And that doesn't happen in politics anymore. We don't have the ability or we don't have the way to sort of find candidates in different ways, or find new policy positions in different ways, because we are so hyper targeted, and because we are so put into boxes very, very early. I mentioned, you know, how stable this race is, and you know, we talk a lot and we see a lot on TV about, you know, that swing voter in Michigan, and they're there, they exist, right? But it's really about how to get those people to turn out. I don't think it's about changing minds or positions at this, and it's in many ways because we've put ourselves into silos. I think we've had some help by the, you know, leadership of one party in particular, but I think that the dark side of this is that we don't get the ability to look at this with fresh eyes. The only thing you see are the things you're supposed to see from your side, and the only thing you see from the other side is pure nonsense and evilness, right? And so I think that's a problem. I think that it very much has led to the polarization that we're seeing. There's very few people who everybody says that they're in the middle, but there's really more and more polarization to the wings of both the left and the right. And I think that the technology is a big part of that. I think that's a real reason why we have a lot of polarization.
Yeah, I just want to confirm, you said twice now that this vote has been very stable. You were referring to the vote, not necessarily the candidates, right? Probably in terms of the stability.
Absolutely. We will not say anything about the stability of the candidates, but we will certainly say much about the stability of the vote. Sure.
All right. So a corollary, Saily, to that is, you know, so how might campaign finance reform law and regulation adapt as technology continues to get more and more powerful in its capabilities? You know, how do you see that adaptation happening? You might be on mute.
Sorry, everybody should have the mute and unmute card. I'm sorry about that. So I'm an attorney. I was once for about 20 years. And so I could see all of the legal pitfalls that the professor talked about, right? The fact that information is gathered and then how it's used is, is kind of, and how all that data exchange and what's going on. I don't really know the answer to how these limits can be put in. And the reason I don't is because, again, I come back to the idea that the people making these decisions are going to be the ones that benefit most from the data exchange. And so what kind of, what are they going to do, right? Are they going to limit data that's then going to data exchanges in a way that's going to hamstring them in the future? I don't know. I don't think so. I don't think there's enough altruism in our legislative bodies for that. I do think that we have to address the privacy issues for all digital data. I mean, it's what we see happening out of, it is very scary to me. I mean, I made light of it before, that someone could find, they know that I bought a mattress, or that I tried to buy a mattress, and for 2 weeks that is the kind of 1984 stuff that does, make my brain like explode. But in terms of what's the practical answer, I don't know that any practical answer is workable in this kind of system right now. And I think it's because a little bit of what the professor said about us being entirely too polarized and not seeing the greater good, where the blinders of the polarized politics are in there. So I don't know the answer. You stumped me. That's not a lot. That doesn't happen a lot.
Fair enough. Moving on, Brendan McKoy. The large technology platforms such as Facebook and Twitter, they're being asked to take on a very large responsibility in terms of determining what news is real or fake. How do you identify and potentially remove false statements? What kind of structure do you think we can put in place to better vet the politicians and their statements? And, afterwards, how might you undo the damage or the results that is made by that initial statement, knowing that, the quickness, the speed that information gets out there, and the durability of, information on the internet?
Yeah, this is, I'm going to be like Saily and say you stumped me too, just because this is a situation where if you ever watch the sort of congressional hearings where, Zuckerberg or Tim Cook or others go in front of congressional representatives, the questions they ask are so woefully misunderstanding of how social media works, how technology works, that, it really doesn't give me a lot of hope, because the answer to me would be some sort of federal legislation to sort of guide and put regulations on how these operations, sort of manifest themselves. But to have representatives who don't know the very basics of the incentives of the platforms and how they make money and all that type of stuff, doesn't breed a lot of confidence. The fact of the matter is just that, as has already been mentioned before, we are in our silos. We continue to choose things that affirm our positions, and it is deeply, deeply corrosive. Me and my colleagues at NJPP, we do a lot of work on what gets termed as progressive policy, though we think it's just math at the end of the day. But even a lot of the times, so for instance, we did a lot of work on the minimum wage, and helping that become a thing in the state of New Jersey, $15 minimum wage. And there were a lot of folks that we engaged in that campaign who didn't really know that much about the minimum wage. They just knew they supported it. But when you would engage them, they would throw all these talking points at you that were the furthest thing from reality, and not actually about the issues that the minimum wage was going to either bring up or help resolve or whatever it may be. And so even when people sort of have, the right thing in their heart, the sort of dispense of really, really warped information makes it harder to do the right thing too. It makes it harder to have honest conversations about the changes we're seeking, right? To stick with that example, a lot of times folks would say, oh, well, if we increase minimum wage, we might lose some jobs. And you'd have people say, no, we're not, that's a lie. Of course we will, yes. But the point is that it's a trade-off that is we're saying it's worth making that trade-off, right? And so because folks are stuck in these sort of echo chambers, they crowd out information that they don't want to hear, and that's sort of, that they think might threaten their position or their argument. And it is very, very, very easy to manipulate that. There's such a thing as called geofencing, where you can sort of advertise and target your social media ads to folks in a specific geolocation, with the goal being, or one of the goals being of that, that, you know, say that you want to influence a certain legislator, you would know where they live, and then you would geolocate a social media message to everybody who lives within a 6-block radius of them. So that the next time that they're at the Wawa getting a sandwich, their neighbor says to them, hey, I saw this thing, you know, come up. What are you doing on that, right? It is so easy for folks to have, to be sort of pushed and nudged in different directions just through their phones. And I really don't know where we go from here, because A, people are way too addicted to their phones. They're way too addicted to not being able to sit in silence and be with their thoughts for 5 seconds. And also it is designed that way on purpose, right? There's a Social Dilemma, a great documentary that just came out on Netflix that talks about how, you know, the ways that these things are designed this way on purpose, but it's going to have a very pernicious effect on our systems of governance across the world. And until we sort of, I don't know, I'm a big fan of trust busting and, you know, getting rid of monopolies and stuff like that. And I don't think Facebook should own Facebook and WhatsApp and Instagram all at the same time. But until we start having real conversations about that and understanding the incentives of how these systems work, I don't really know where we go from here.
Professor Hale, similar, you know, question again. I think Brandon was nice. He was giving people the benefit of the doubt that they weren't trying to mislead, and sometimes, you know, folks do, but that information gets out there. So again, similar, you know, same question. How do you deal with that?
Well, you know, I think Brandon hit on a couple interesting ideas. So one of the things that he talked about that I think is really important is the idea of trade-offs. And one of the ways that our political landscapes, the narratives that we tell right now, is that you can have all the guns you want and all the butter. You can have that there is no losing in politics. And there is. Everybody loses in politics. It's that you trade off one thing to get another. You have a balanced bundle of things. And so the more that we can explain that, you know, if you have a higher minimum wage, yes, you will lose some jobs in the short term. In the long term, having a higher minimum wage will get you more jobs. You know, so it's explaining those trade-offs, I think, is important. You know, I do think that other ideas about the fake news that I think are interesting. And I think some of the social media companies have tried to do this, is they're actually trying to experiment with delay, right? With the idea that before something can be reposted or something that can be sent out, there's a little bit of a pause, right? And the idea is that pause may help prevent something from going skyrocketing viral, right? And so it's just this sense that before this information gets sent out to everybody, we're going to just slow it down a little bit. We're going to send it, but we're going to slow it down a little bit. And that's a work in progress, right? And that's another sort of thing that I think is important. You know, the idea of trust busting, or the idea of regulating social media companies as media companies, and making an argument that what they do is essentially done over public airspace, like television is certainly one sort of longer term aspect. But I also wanted to talk a little bit about, maybe on the other side of things, about how do we do the big money versus small money. And I just would point people to an experiment that happened in Seattle. And what they've done in Seattle, this is an idea that has gone back, you know, to the early 2000s. I think it happened the year Brandon graduated high school, from what I read. So it's been, you know, a ways back. But the idea is that you provide voters with a voucher by which they can donate to a campaign. So in Seattle, they gave a $100 voucher, and they gave it to everyone who was registered to vote. And you can use it in any campaign within Seattle that you want to use it. And so you can use it to fund any candidate. And what happens is, in order to accept that money, the candidate has to agree to spending limits. So the candidate has to say, I'm not going to take $10 million from one person. I'm going to limit my maximum donation to $250 or something like that. In exchange, I'm going to get this level of money. And so it's a really interesting idea in that it's a voluntary system. If you decide in the middle of the campaign as a candidate that you want to take the 10 million, you can. You can't take any more of the public funding. There might be penalties as well. But the idea is that you're incentivizing people to not just vote, but you're giving them actual power by which to donate to the campaigns. There's a lot of things to work out. In Seattle last time, they gave out about $1 million total, because only 3% of the people who got the vouchers actually gave the money. Now that's the first time it's ever been done. So it's going to increase, right? There's going to be some increase. That's as people learn how to do that. It costs them about $1 million, I guess, to give out at $1.1 million. But it's an idea that seems to be able to pass scrutiny of get around Citizens United, because it's not a government mandate. It is not it is a voluntary set of campaign finance restrictions that has the potential to sort of get around this until Citizens United is changed or something like that. This is a potential idea to really incentivize regular folks, give them the equivalent of $100 to donate who they want to, and that's how you fund the campaigns. If this was done nationally, the estimates are that it would be about $7 billion that could get raised. The last estimate of the amount of money spent on federal campaigns was about 6.8. So you would have $7 billion of public money, which is a lot of money, I understand, but it would equalize all of the private giving and replace much of the private giving. So I agree that this is not an easy problem to solve, but I do think there are a couple little tweaks that we might give a shot to.
That's a really interesting idea. I like that. Very fascinating. Brandon, I want to come back to you on the smaller scale. We have our eyes so focused on a national election and state elections, but I want to move to the regional, the county and the municipal, because software is becoming so affordable and dynamically, changing. What do you think are the implications for local elections and campaigns? What do you see in terms of change for the future, in terms of how smaller campaigns, being municipal, et cetera, are going to be able to use technology?
Well, I remember, oh man, it's almost 10 years ago now. I was a campaign manager in Alex Torpey's campaign in South Orange when he was 21 and I was 20.
How'd that end up?
Ended up pretty well. What was that, like 16, 17 votes that he won by, right? So everything.
But he won, I believe.
Vote counts. And even I remember back then we were trying to use this new organizing app called Asana, just trying to figure out how can we, go ahead and take advantage of this. And I believe Alex's campaign was the first campaign in the United States to use Nation Builder at the time. And so that, fast forward 10 years now almost, and Nation Builder's been humongous. I believe the Trump campaign used it in 2016. But it's to the point where local campaigns have the ability to use sort of databases and technology and software without breaking the bank, right? And you have an ability to not only engage voters, but track that engagement and ensure follow-up, and also just see how folks are sort of viewing the pitch that you're making, and then the issues that you're pointing to, see what they're thinking of it, see if they're really digging it and liking it, or see if they're sort of rejecting it, and so you can sort of pivot in real time if you need to. And I think there's good things about that, because then local candidates ideally would know more about their constituents and sort of the voters who are in the area and what are the issues that are important to them. But also, it really comes down to the candidate themselves, right? It's all about who is this person and what are they doing this for and why. You can have a candidate who really has good intentions and wants to do the best and wants to do right by their constituents, and we use that information for authentic, positive purposes. But then you can have candidates who are just power hungry and not to say that it's either or, you can have a nice healthy balance of both, who are just power hungry and just will use that information to figure out, well, what do I got to say, right? What do I got to say to win? And that's all that matters. And so I think just generally as voters, we're going to have to become a little bit more savvy about the ways that we are being manipulated and the ways that folks are viewing us and sort of the ways that they are engaging us and the information that they're getting about us. But it is a significant concern. I do sort of think about all the ways in which technology, people really think that is going to, replace face-to-face contact. And there's a fantastic book called Triumph of the City by Edward Glaser, I believe, that talks about how, after every major technological advance, it's been sort of predicted that, the need or the importance of the city was going to die, right? After Morse code, after the telephone, after the fax machine, and obviously that never took place. And the internet, same situation, especially after COVID, when everybody's staying home and, being able to do their jobs by Zoom more or less, a lot of people we are having this moment now again where we're saying, well, how important really is space and place? But I think especially when it comes to campaigns, space and place is always going to be serious and important and necessary, right? I will always be more likely to vote for somebody who comes to my door and talks to me for 10 minutes than I will somebody who just engages me a million times over Twitter, right? And just asks me for money and sends me annoying text messages. Just us sitting here, I've gotten text messages from Elizabeth Warren, Bernie Sanders, Joe Biden, and somebody in South Carolina, Jamie Harrison. So, I don't know them, right? I mean, I've met Elizabeth Warren once, I met Joe Biden once, but I don't know them. But for local elections, if somebody comes to my door and I get a sense that I kind of know them a little bit, and they sort of listen to me and try to hear what I want out of my local government and what I want my town and my city to look like, I think that will always trump, digital campaigning. But obviously, digital campaigning that is being done because it's an efficiency determination. It's a bang for your buck determination. But when you get down to local campaigns, I don't know if the bang for the buck has as much value as it does at national campaigns.
Cool. Let's segue a little bit, but using that perspective now, we talked primarily about from the candidate and the campaign perspective. Now let's think about it from us as individual voters, resident citizens, and our use of technology. Saily, I'm going to ask you to put on your visionary glasses here. Those are your visionary glasses. Crystal ball.
I can't see far, but all right, let's work with what we got.
Crystal ball for us a little bit on how voters are going to want technology, things that they can use in order for them to come to better decisions or whatever. How do you think voters are going to want to use technology going forward?
We saw this after the 2016 election, and I was thinking about when you posed the question to us earlier, I was thinking about how that had evolved over 4 years. Remember all the apps that you could put on your phone that check someone's record, right? Their voting record. It could tell you in a minute, what vote was up. Such and such a congressperson in your, that represents you is going to vote on this. This is affecting you. This is what they voted on. I think we are in an instant gratification phase of society, and we have been for a while. So we want things that will make our experiences instant, gratifying in the moment, and quick. So having those informations, those voter companion pieces, those voter companion apps have been very helpful, I think, to get people, one, it's educated, but also two, and I come back to this, it's feeling as they're part of the process, right? Because so much of what we learned, what we felt pre-2016, for those of us that weren't very politically engaged, was this idea that there was an us and a them, right? There was us here who didn't really engage in politics. We voted, but we weren't part of the process. And then the them that did all that fun stuff over there. And I think having, the ability to have an app on your phone that makes you conversant very quickly in what they are doing as it relates to us has been very helpful for people also to feel like they have a measure of control, right? Because some of these apps are interactive where you have opinion polls and you have how would you like them to vote? And, then came ResistBot, right? Where you can just instantly find a way to communicate with your legislator in a way that was quick, easy, took out the mystery of communicating. And I remember, again, from my time organizing with NJ11, part of what we had to get over, part of what we tried to do as an organization is provide a feeling of community when people went to engage with the congressman at the time, right? It was the feeling of, I'm not going to go, like, who's going to talk to me? Like, it's so scary to go up to somebody and talk to them about, for example, your personal health issues and how a law could affect them. But if you went as a community, that part felt like, all right, I have a support system. And some of these apps have been able, I think, to bridge that gap a little bit, to make us feel like it's easy to do, right? We can send a letter quickly. I got it right there, resist bot, you send it really quickly, it's done. It does it for you, communicates, and you don't feel this like, parking your car and thinking about what they're going to say and the person-to-person interaction, and maybe you didn't vote for this person, and how is that interaction going to go? And it's very personal, again, to stand there and give them your experience that you want to communicate. So I do think that from the voter perspective, what's happened over the last 4 or 5 years has been really incredible to bridge that gap. I would love to see more happen in that space, but I will stand, on the hill that Brandon put up, I will die on that hill. I will vote for a human who has walked and talked to me before I will vote for a random person who's never, attempted to make contact with me. I do think that so for the candidates that I'm never going to meet, the Elizabeth Warrens of the world that are just never going to walk by my house because I don't live in that kind of place. She's going to just happen to walk by West Caldwell one day. It's different, right? Because it's okay. But for the candidate that's going to go to the council and talk about the stoplight on my corner, that person better show up at my house and have a conversation before they get my vote, because I think there is a person that's personal to me. So I think we can't lose that piece, but we can amplify, right? We can have technology that gives me the tools to have a discussion with that person when they walk in the door, but doesn't take away from the discussion, because that's always going to be the first thing that I go back to. Did they treat me with respect? Did they answer my questions? Were they, did we agree on the issues or not? And even if we didn't agree, how were those other two things handled, right? Did they treat me with respect? Because I think, again, the personal comes first, but the technology has to be, in service to that, not to replace that.
That's great. So, I feel like we could go on for hours here. This is really, we've gotten terrific panelists. I have other questions that I know that I would like to ask, and perhaps even leave room for a closing statement. But before we do that, Mary, do we have any questions that have come from our audience that we want to take on?
Well, nobody posted anything in the chat, but they might have questions that they didn't post.
All right. Well, then let me come to, so it's 8:22. We have, let's say, 10 minutes left. Again, I know I appreciate everybody who has come today, and especially our panelists. This last question I have is a bit of a catch-all, and for the panelists, let me prompt you. You're welcome to use this as your closing statement. You have a couple of minutes. Yeah, the prompt I'm thinking about, and quite frankly, it could be in another hour or a few, but we are really in a mode now. We're just discussing social justice and changes, and technology, and is obviously one of the ways that we can gain leverage to get to some of those places. And clearly, voting is how we'll make change. So citizenship goes beyond voting, right? So our access to high-speed internet technologies and other technologies can play a major role in alleviating these societal problems in the areas of education and health disparities. There's new platforms, educational platforms such as MOOCs, the massive open online courses, and other innovative health technologies such as telehealth and fitness health apps. But they are completely inaccessible to areas of the world that just don't have the economic ability, and they could probably benefit most from them. So a couple of minutes from the three of you, that's a question about what we can do, because we're all very active in politics. We all want to make a difference. What are the kinds of things that we might be able to do using technology to engender more equity amongst our citizens? So Brandon, why don't we kick it off with you if you're ready?
I mean, generally speaking, the lack of high-speed internet access throughout the country and even the state, for folks who, there is a Central Jersey and there is a South Jersey. They're two distinct things. When you go to South Jersey, there is quite a lot of space, quite a lot of towns that don't really have reliable internet access, right? That's a major problem for participation and sort of just equity and access to information. That's a major issue. When you have bad storms down there, the copper lines go down and folks just lose internet access for hours on end. So basic, broadband access, we're learning about that a lot right now with regards to kids in school during the day and who has access to high speed versus not, and that makes a major difference. But makes a difference for, just general information, which will always be tied to democracy and government as well. And honestly, investing in elections in general, right? Making sure we have enough money for polling locations, for safe machines, for secure machines. When you see lines of people, waiting to vote, fortunately, I don't think we see them as much here in New Jersey as we do elsewhere. But sometimes you'll have people say, "Oh, isn't it wonderful how many people and how much people want to vote?" No, that is awful. People should not have to wait more than 5 minutes to vote, right? We should have a robust enough democracy and invest in it enough that folks can go and vote without much issue. And so that is something that does not, happen without public investment, and public investment does not happen with tax cuts. I will make my plug for my organization. We do a lot of work on tax and budget policy. New Jersey has had for the majority of its last 30 years, extreme trickle down austerity policy. So, sort of pushing back the idea that, government is bad always and forever, and, understanding that government has a role to play in securing access and rights for everyone. And part of that means having a robust tax policy so we can invest in the things that we all need. And, robust sort of election infrastructure is certainly a big part of that.
Great. Thank you. Thank you, Brandon. Professor Matt Hale, your closing statement.
So, the couple interesting things that I'll just end with is clearly the digital divide is still with us. It's different than it was 30 years ago, but one of the ways it's manifesting itself is, as Brandon said, is the way that we're educating our kids remotely right now. My son goes to Columbia High School, and when the pandemic shut everything down, the school had to really struggle and realize how many kids did not have access to internet, how many kids did not have a computer at home. And that was not something that they were ready for at all. And they are still struggling with it. It took all of the end of the school year last year, I think, to get access to every kid. And it was months. And in the meantime, kids who did have internet access, kids who did have computers, the kids who were advantaged, were sitting at home not being able to interact in the way that you could with the technology because it wasn't as widespread. And if that's happening in South Orange, and it's happening everywhere, it's not just South Orange for sure, but if that type of unequal access is happening to this technology, not only does it hurt the kids and the families and the people who don't have the technology, it hurts the people who do, because you can't have a full playing field, a fair playing field, without having those sort of technologies. I think you certainly could have universal access. We have universal phone lines that are paid for in part by the phone companies. We certainly could have universal internet access and high-speed internet access, and that's part of the investment in that I think Brandon is talking about, and I think that's important. One other thing that is interesting to think about when we think about globally, my understanding is that the number of personal computers, the number of laptops that people in the developing world have, is minuscule compared to what it ought to be in many respects, when you think about a development curve. And so you get worked up, and should we buy laptops? Should we get laptops? No, because everybody's on their phone, right? So the leapfrog ability of technology is something that when you're thinking about what to invest in for those who don't have now, don't invest in old technology, invest in the new technology so that they can, so that those who don't have can leapfrog, right? And leapfrog to what's next. I think that's important. And then, you know, Steve, you mentioned MOOCs, right? And they're interesting, they're phenomenal, and they're a failure in so many different ways. And they're a failure because 1,500 people in a class where you never talk to another human is not a model that people are willing, and especially something that you're not willing to, again, pay for and invest in. They're going to have a place, you know, and things like that. But ultimately, there is that that personal connection that I think is so essential underlying all of this. And we've said that before throughout tonight. And I'll just give a last shout out that Brandon, I knew I liked you because Central Jersey is absolutely a place. It's 100% a place. As a elected representative of Highland Park, New Jersey, Central Jersey is real. Central Jersey is its own place. And thank you very much for saying that. I really appreciate it.
I live in it, so it better be.
There you go. There you go. See, I knew you there again. All right, fantastic.
All right, it sounds like we have Saily. You get the final word. If you get to wrap this up with your comments, so hit us strong. You're on mute though.
Once again, I'll be really quick. For this girl who grew up in Hudson County, I'm really sorry to say that there was no Central Jersey because everything south of 78 was the shore, like was very close to the shore. And I know, like as an adult, so sorry. The second piece is they've said it better than I did. I think we have to, you know, in terms of the practical aspects of what we need to be doing for the digital divide. But I just want to make a general comment that if you're not approaching legislation with a social justice lens, you're essentially creating, you know, it's legislative malpractice these days. And I think part of what we see all the time is that things get to 95% and then they're like, oh, you know, we should have done this to address the social justice aspect. And I think if we had started out with the premise that all of these legislations, all of these innovations, and all of these programs need to be looked at, viewed, just, you know, built, all of it with an eye towards the social justice aspect so that we are addressing at every point, we would have a better result than finding ourselves the way we did over the summer, finding that, you know, school systems couldn't open because kids could not log on or did not have enough computers. And I think that is just something, to me, it's legislative malpractice, and we are not in this day and age looking at things at day one and saying, how is this going to affect these communities and what are we doing to fix it? So I'll leave it at that.
That was great. I want to conclude, Mary, unless is there anything else?
No, I want to thank all of you again. And also a Hudson County girl. Where in Hudson County?
Union City, Cuban.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Now Jersey City.
Oh, there you go. My husband's from Jersey City.
There you go. Yes. Yeah, no, I know. My husband grew up in Irvington. As he got onto the Parkway, there was a sign there that said Jersey Shore.
Right? And that's what. Like as soon as you got on,
it was right there.
It was a line,
as a
and
kid,
that was
his
it.
entire life. It's like, why is it taking so long to get there? There's a
I'm sorry to the two of you.
with an arrow. Anyway, so not to digress, but thank you all again so much. Thank you, Steve, for putting these questions together, helping organize this, and Matt for helping to invite our wonderful speakers, Brandon, lovely, and Saily, lovely to meet you both. I hope to see you in person one of these days. Thanks to everybody who came. So as I was saying, this is being recorded. I will send our speakers a link to it. So once it's posted, so if you want to access it for whatever reason, you'll have access. If you'd like a copy, let me know. I can download it and get it to you. So in case there's some reason you want to use it, but it does become part of the materials for this grant and this project. Yeah, I think I'm good. We do have another event on November 2nd. I know we're gluttons for punishment, the day before the election. But about sort of the divisiveness and the way technology, typical media versus sort of traditional media versus social media may be contributing to this divisiveness and this division among the electorate. So that's coming up. And otherwise, I think I'm good. How about Steve? You want to say good night?
I just
Good night,
want to
Steve.
thank again you, Mary, and Marta, and the Digital Citizenry Project for sponsoring this, but especially our panelists, Matt Hale, Brandon McKoy, and Saily Avelenda. You guys really brought some fresh ideas and great perspectives. So thank you so much.
Yes, and thank you, Matt, too. I think I forgot you in my thanks, but thank you very much, my colleague and friend. So take care, everybody. Have a lovely night. Thank you so much.
you.
Thank
Be
you
healthy
so
and
much.
safe.
Bye, everybody. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank
Thanks.
you. Hello, Elizabeth. Goodbye, Elizabeth. Bye-bye. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you.
You can hit the record, Mary, I guess.
Thank you. Good idea.
Okay.